As artists, we often do want to create impact with our work, to build an audience and hopefully over time leave a legacy of art that truly has meaning, similar to a lot of the artists that inspired us to get into this whole art game in the first place. But it's easy to look up at those artists and a lot of the people that we see today who are really doing quite well with their art. They often seem to have everything kind of figured out. They have this really sort of consistent style. In fact, a lot of these people that we do recognize have what I like to call presence. They are easily recognizable. It's easy to tell who they are. And I think this is one of the things that builds a lot of the success that artists have. But it's often tricky in the beginning to kind of flip-flop. We often get caught up being distracted by shiny object syndrome as artists. One day it's plein air painting, the next day it's 3D modeling, next day we're buying a 3D printer, and then we're all the way back to maybe kind of sculpting in mud or something like that. Whatever kind of seems to be an interesting pathway, right? Often people will flip-flop between new technology and then just kind of wanting to retreat to a little cabin in the woods and sort of take up basket weaving or carving sticks. And I think this is just integral to the artistic ethos. We do want to experiment, but often what success means is doing a similar thing over time, really figuring out what you have to say and then refining that and repeating it, playing your greatest hits over time. This is what I like to call the concept of presence. And what we're going to do in this episode is dive deep into this concept and look at how often, if you really get this dialed in and you really set your sights on this, even in the beginning, when it's hard to build your style, you're maybe not all there yet. If you really focus on this idea, it can often be the difference between your career kind of being a snowball that sort of rolls downhill by itself versus you just kind of having to push this ridiculous heavy object uphill all the time. Welcome to the Visual Skull Podcast. My name is Tim Mcburnie. I have been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this show, we're all about demystifying the worlds of art, creativity, and productivity so that you can get better faster and enjoy your artistic journey. Check out my free brainstorming toolkit. If you want to take your art to the next level and really improve your skills, one of the best ways is to create your own personal artistic project. And to do that, you need a great idea. An idea that you're passionate about, that is unique and original to you, that is going to allow you to see this project through. I've taken the same tools and frameworks that I use every day and created a workshop on world building, ideation, and brainstorming. In it, you'll learn things like how to quiet the editing mind, how to enhance your blue sky brainstorming ability, and how to use brainstorming anchors for things like story or even your pre-existing ideas and proclivities as an artist. This is a free training. I think you're really going to enjoy it. So if that is something you're interested in, go check it out. The link will be in the description. Over the last few episodes on the Visual Scholar podcast, I've been going over what I'm tentatively calling my impact framework. This is a collection of ideas and some ways to think about tackling that really tricky topic of how do we get people to like our work? Now, this is a massive, amorphous, tricky topic to deal with, but I think there are ways for us to think through this and get a good handle on maybe some good strategies to use going forward. Now, with this framework, if you listen to the previous episodes, you'll kind of understand a bit of this, but I've been using the metaphor of sound to really help us visual artists maybe visualize or understand a little bit more of what we're up against. And the goal here is just to give us another look at what we actually need to do. Now, this metaphor of sound has three main components. The first is the concept of signal that I've sort of covered fairly in depth in a previous episode, where we're really considering what is our style visually. What are you all about as an artist? What is the vibe, the mood, the feeling, the meaning, right? The core meaning. I know it sounds cheesy, but I think even if you're doing really base entertainment design things, that still has meaning. That still has something that you need to understand about it. And you need to do that really well. Like, what is the core element of your sort of cheap action film ethos that you're about as an artist, right? Like going deep there, really understanding it is critical. This is not always a matter of like hoity-toity, capital A art meaning. I think no matter what we're doing, figuring out really what your signal is and what you're trying to say about the world is critical. It doesn't have to be fancy, but you do have to be clear on it. Secondly, which is what I covered in the previous episode, is volume or amplification. And this is how you take your visual signal, what you have to say about the world visually, and we amplify it. There's a variety of different ways to do this, but the key is, as we discussed in that episode, really figuring out how to tailor the exact way that you get attention with your art. Some of these things can be cheap tricks, right? Some of these things can be crass, but making sure that you use the tools that help to amplify your message and what you have to say about the world, not necessarily listening to what other people think is good about art or should be in every good piece of art or the rules of composition that everyone suggests you use, but like, what are the things that are specific to the signal you have where you can really amplify and turn up your message? I often think, and this is something we'll be sort of touching on as well today in this episode, that often this is a matter of giving things up, of creating clarity around your signal and figuring out how you're going to amplify it. So that's the basic idea of what we've sort of been covering. And the last little trick here, the third pillar of this framework, is what we're going to be talking about today, which is presence. And really, this is the end game. Like, this is kind of what we're after. And we'll dive into this in much more detail. But we're kind of after what I was talking about in the intro, is often those artists that you see who you kind of know who they are. And it's easy for you to communicate who they are to other people and that their work is consistent. And often, even with artists who are older and maybe have passed, when people make an art book that is meant to typify and really sort of showcase who that artist was, they kind of include some works, right? They pick the apex work that really defines that artist. And what you find is, like, when you put all those works together, the things that are those artists' seminal works, right? They're sort of the ultimate manifestation of whatever they had to say about the world that other people sort of enjoyed and connected with. A lot of stuff is left out, but what's in there is often a real presence of visual style. And I think this is also something that we see in artists today, where you are sort of just scrolling through one of these social media attention economy feeds somewhere on the planet, right? Scroll. And you kind of just notice, this is what I noticed anyways, like, I noticed there are some artists where I've never met them. I don't really even know who they are. Like, I haven't put any conscious effort, but I kind of do know who they are because they've been putting out a very clear signal and they've been doing it over time. And what I'm really doing here with this idea of presence is to see if we can, like, maybe do a bit of that on purpose. I think over the years, people kind of luck into this. We often do this by accident and we sort of figure out what works and then we sort of keep doing it. But I guess the question is, like, can we just do that on purpose? And can we put some effort into it? And can we maybe do it so it serves us? Many artists these days build a great presence, not really doing what is true to their heart as an artist. Many people build great online presences. They build great YouTube channels, great Instagram profiles. They build these things, and it's kind of, they're just following trends. They're just looking at what's popular. It's not really who they are. And I think if we try and do this more consciously, we can maybe hopefully get to a better place where your art not only has some of that popularity, that's the ideal goal, I guess, but also that people are really liking you for you, because I think that's where often you see this thing snowball, is that people are actually liking you for who you are. They actually like your work in the same way that you like it. And I think that's where you're going to find much more connection. So that's really the goal here. And this is stuff, the reason that I think a lot about these things is that I see these are challenges that many of us face, and potentially you have faced these things as well, where you find it easy to kind of flip-flop between one thing and another. And this is because this was my experience. I spent a lot of time not just kind of flip-flopping between saying, okay, I'm going to become a comic book artist, because this is what happened to me. I mean, I remember trying to be in my little, it wasn't actually a basement, but it felt like a basement, sort of making art, little sort of room out the back, making my art, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my career. And, one of the things that we often lack in the beginning is this presence. We don't have any sense of who we are. And it's hard for anyone to sort of really recognize us unless they really know us personally. And I would flip-flop between sort of learning 3D, I think it was 3D Studio Max 2.5, learning vector design tools, hoping maybe I would do illustration that way. I learned a bunch of traditional art skills. I was learning Photoshop. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to become a 3D modeler for games, because that seemed like, again, it wasn't that that's what I wanted to do, but like that seemed like stuff that other people were saying, hey, there's more jobs doing this. And then it was, maybe I'll do texture art for games. Maybe I could do concept art for games. Maybe I could do illustration. Maybe I could do children's book illustration. Like there was so many things that I wanted to do. And I kind of would just flip-flop between everything. And my career, this is, obviously because my craft probably wasn't there. My professionalism probably wasn't there. But also there was really no way for anyone to figure out or know who I was, because I was just doing a whole bunch of stuff. And even after I got my first job, right, as a professional comic book artist, and I've spoken briefly about this sort of concept before, I kind of, sort of had this style that I was working in before I worked in that comic, and I was trying to figure it out. And the process of actually creating that comic forced me to kind of make my style a lot more efficient. And that kind of worked out really well, but it kind of drifted me away from the style that I guess I was really interested in and the things that I was really into. And then when I went to do my next book, because I wasn't really thinking of this, I wasn't really thinking about like how I was coming across to other people and to the audience and what other people would think of my work. And part of this is just that, like, I just didn't really know yet, right? Like, this is not something where you have to do this in some linear fashion. But because I just, firstly, didn't know what type of art I wanted to make, but also I didn't understand that me really just picking something that I was really interested in and committing to that was probably really important. And instead, often what happened is I would kind of go down these other rabbit holes saying like, well, this is really what I want to do. These are the things that I want to say. But I would notice that it would be easier to get this other style through publishers, or this was a style of concept art that was working, or maybe this would be an easier job to get. I would just kind of constantly be flip-flopping and losing my sort of focus. And it wasn't really until a long time later that I understood that I needed to stop doing that. And I needed to really figure out, like, what do I actually want to do? And then to consistently produce that work over time to the point where, people would notice that I was doing it. And that really is, I guess, the epitome. That's like the whole point of the concept of building presence over time. And, it wasn't until I, probably like 10, 15 years later, right into my career, I really kind of clicked and I was like, oh, okay. Like this actually makes a difference. And as soon as that, I really made a conscious decision there. Like I had the skills, I had the ability, I had the track record, I had the credits, but it really wasn't until that clicked and I just kind of started doing the same thing and kind of presenting my work and saying like, hey, this is actually what I want to do, that I feel like my career kind of really took off. So I feel like this is a really important aspect of your career as an artist. And especially if you are a little bit lost in your career, I think this can really help us. But also, again, I really think that even if you're just in the beginning and you're like, look, I can't even draw a circle, right? I can barely even draw a person, like nothing's kind of working. I think so much of what burns our time and energy and effort is just maybe thinking that like the more different skills we acquire, the better everything's going to get. And it often is the case that really people do appreciate a consistent signal. They want to sort of understand who you are as a person and to do that through your art. This is what I have come to understand anyway. And that you can do this really early on, even maybe if your craft isn't that good. If you can connect with people, create presence. Again, the craft can often be really secondary. I think you can see that. And I'm sure that you've seen that with other artists out there. It's like some people, they're really consistent. People connect with their work. their craft is not that great, but everyone's happy, right? And I think this is just such an important aspect of the artistic journey to grasp. Before we, I guess, really get going, the first point that I want to make here is that this, I guess, aversion almost a lot of us have to really kind of doing this and just kind of repeating the same thing that works is that often with everything in life, if you're kind of already good at something and you just kind of repeat the same thing again and again, it kind of becomes boring for most people. There are some of us who really like the perfection of craft, the repetition, the catharsis of creation, who are maybe less interested in like new shiny things. But again, often those people are interested in like new shiny tools or like, particular methods to get the craft. But look, we're all a little bit different. But ultimately, I think a lot of artists are creative by default. And we do like to do this thing where it's so fun to learn something new. And a lot of the artists, I think, who find some success are people who found enjoyment in the act of learning to make art, that you just wanted to get better at these things. And it's so fun to pick up a new medium, a new set of tools, a new genre, to sort of go through that little romantic process where you're learning something new and you get better and better at it. And it's much more challenging to be at a place where you do have your craft sorted out and you're kind of already pretty good at everything and you put in a huge amount of effort and maybe you get like things to look 1% better. Like that's often the experience. As in the beginning, as we're learning something new, there's all sorts of hurdles that we face and it can be very frustrating early on, but you are often seeing massive gains in the beginning, ideally. As you progress, you're putting in just as much effort, but you're getting very little, right? It's like things are changing a tiny little bit. And this is something that I've kind of talked about where like I would kind of say, hey, this style's different and that style's different. I'm trying something new. I'm doing this. And then often the feedback I get from most people is like, it all looks the same to me. So I think there is often a degree to where like when you are just going down one track, like I can think I'm putting in a lot of effort, but I'm not often seeing like a huge amount of difference. And I think this for people can just be very frustrating. And especially if you are kind of forced to do that for a job, if you have very little ability as an artist to be creative in what you're doing, it kind of is worse than, like working in a factory for some people, because you're kind of forced to do this faux creativity, but you're kind of dead inside because you're trying to put your soul into it, right? And you kind of can't change these things. You're just going through the same paces. You're painting the same stuff again and again and again, right? I think there's just an inherent tension within the artistic being that we do want to experiment. We do want to push things. I think there's a huge variety of other reasons why pushing yourself and experimenting and flip-flopping is just something that's enjoyable as artists. I think it's good to take on new challenges and often trying to learn some new medium, change our style, do something different is a great way to stay fresh. On the other hand, you can see that often when I see artists who seem to have kind of gotten to a good degree of success with their career, is they kind of have reached a point where they've either lucked into it, they've done it purposely, like whatever has happened, they've kind of really figured out what people want from them. And often they're kind of just doing that. And this will often be the case, if you, for instance, we could take as an example, a professional illustrator, where maybe in the beginning for illustrators, certainly in the past, it was advised to have multiple styles, to be able to kind of work on a variety of different jobs, cartoony, realistic, like whatever it is, you kind of just say yes to everything. But as you progress, some of the work you do maybe resonates with people better than others. Some of the work that you do maybe is on a book cover or something that becomes really successful. And then everyone kind of just wants that from you because that's the thing that succeeded. That's where you kind of found, again, from business parlance, you would call this like product market fit, right? Which is like where people actually want the product. And I think this is a great place to be as an artist. This is something that I've experienced not happening with sort of various things that I've done where I'm like, again, it's literally like you're pushing stuff uphill. And then other situations where, I just sort of take the right type of art, the right style, the right skills, and I kind of put it in the right market. This for me happened a lot of the times with concept art, you having sort of a European comic book style. All of a sudden, that was like a really easy thing to sell. Again, not easy, but compared to some of the other things, right? It felt like finally I could kind of see that people might actually appreciate what I had. So often what happens then for a lot of people is you just kind of keep doing that, and people keep asking you to do that, and you keep doing that, and people keep asking you for that, and you try and do something else, and people are like, they sort of slap your hand, right? Bang. And you're like, don't do that. Go do the other thing. And then we just keep doing that, right? And also to a certain degree, you kind of forget to do other stuff, right? You kind of just get so used to working in a particular style, a particular feeling. And I think often what happens is you do get this good confluence where people find a lot of success, where not only is that success being found, but people actually enjoy that. And so they keep wanting to do that. And so they build that body of work, and people start to notice them over time. And, that's where you kind of get these artists that I guess we remember a little bit more than others. Now, again, there is a magic aspect to this. I'm not suggesting that if you just apply a formula, you can kind of become a great, well-known artist. But I do think that the fundamental problem here is we are often working against our best interests as creative individuals when it comes to finding often the success that we kind of want as well. And the fundamental equation here is people pay you more and appreciate you for things that you're already good at. That's what people can notice you're good at. We're less interested in people's experiments, right? Unless you're an artist. A lot of artists love sketches. We love experiments. We love seeing what people are doing. Your general population, they just want to understand more about who that particular artist is. They want to hire that particular artist because they know they're going to produce particular type of work for them. Whatever that interaction is, whether it's a fan, quote unquote, liking your work, buying a product because of you as an artist, or whether it's an art director or someone who commissions art, actively pursuing you because they want exactly what you've got, just a little bit different. It's like, I want to buy that thing. I want to buy your style, right? Your signal, but I want you to just kind of do it for me here. So that's kind of often what is going to work for us. Right? Like that is often what success looks like. And I think a lot of artists are frustrated by this, but, often I think they just kind of give into it. So this is just one of these things where I'm not suggesting this is an easy solve, because fundamentally we have tension here. And I think as artists, we need to appreciate that tension between our desire for experimentation, for new, and also this kind of place that I think we should be going towards, which is where we are easily recognizable for doing a particular thing. And again, I don't think this has much to do with skill or craft or experience. This is a matter of connection with people and being able to create a persona of yourself that is recognizable, that people are interested in. And, there is a mechanistic aspect to this. I do appreciate that, again, there is a magic to, truly kind of reaching sort of some point of success. But again, I think the more you understand the fundamental tension here, the easier it will be to, maybe just go easy on yourself, right? If this doesn't come naturally. So that's easy to say, right? It's easy to kind of say, hey, this is a good thing. It's hard. What can we actually do about it? So the second thing I want to dig into here is, I guess, looking at what success might mean here. Like, what are we actually heading towards when it comes to presence? Because as I was touching on, there is a magic to this. There is a feeling like this is an amorphous, kind of impossible to grasp thing, right? It's like Icarus flying too close to the sun. We warned about this in mythology. But I think there's a really simple way to understand what we're talking about here, which is to think about often when you do see an artist that you really enjoy, like there is a certain degree to where it's really clear who they are. And a good way I like to describe this is that it's almost like a caricature of that artist. And I think someone who has good signal, good presence, good branding, it's someone who is very easily recognizable, and it's very easy to understand what they're about. And when you see sort of one piece of their work, when you see a single work, you look at it and you get a pretty good feeling for who that artist is. And then when you see more of it, it's very similar. And you learn a little bit more about who they are from each piece. But you're really seeing a pattern there. There is a recognition of that caricature of an individual, like a little character you're creating, an avatar of yourself that you kind of put out, a brand, right? A symbolic representation of you that is easy to understand. It's easy to access. And it's very clear that, like, if someone were to like the type of art you're making, because not everyone's going to like the type of art that we make, right? Some people just don't like some things, right? But I guess the question is, like, if, and there's a couple of little examples I'll use here, but, if someone was out there in the ether and they saw one piece of your work, and we should view this as like a godsend, right? Like someone saw a piece of our art somewhere. Like, does it speak to them? Does it connect you across time and space? If they were to like your work and they see one piece of it, are they going to like it? Are they going to be connected? Are they going to be drawn to you and be like, oh, there's more of this? And when they see more of this, they're going to be like, oh, this is exactly what I want. As opposed to, often, this is how I would describe it, is like, imagine if you're at a party and you're at a party full of artists and you meet someone and you understand, oh, they like this type of art. This is often what happens. Like, hey, have you seen this person's work? Have you seen that person's work? Oh, you like this. Have you seen this? This is often one of the fun things that we like to do just between artists. But this could also go for a party full of people who aren't artists, right? Often recommending an artist is a really good thing, but only if you're kind of really confident that you can clearly explain it, and that you're confident that when you do say, hey, go check out this artist, that person is going to buy their book or do the thing, look at their profile online, search their name, go to their website, and that they're actually going to get that. So part of, like, I guess, facilitating the sharing of your work and the representing of yourself as, like an iconic artist is that it's easy for people to explain who you are. It's easy for people to describe your art, and that you have built presence there where, like, if someone was to like a bit of your art or be suggested that they go and look at it, that when they go look at it, that is what they get, and that there's a whole bunch of it there. Like, it's really simple, really. But a good way to kind of break this down is to think about clarity, because clarity really is key here. And this often happens to me where I'm like, oh, I think you'd really like this artist that I've kind of seen, but, like, I can't really remember their name. I don't really know where to find it. That's where we're kind of like, we're in trouble, right? Or where I kind of maybe know their name, but I don't really know how to describe it. Maybe they sort of do a couple of different things. Maybe, I'm not quite sure whether that person would actually enjoy going to look at their Instagram profile. Maybe, it's like half pictures of call out and half pictures of their cat or whatever. And again, maybe the cat is part of your story. Maybe that's part of your presence. But, for a lot of people, it's not, right? Like, often there's just no consistent place to even find us online. And there's not a very consistent bunch of images there. And that's probably the case for me if you went and sort of looked at my stuff, which is why I'm talking about this, right? Because I think these are all things I'm going to apply over the next few years in a big way. If we break all of that down, I think you can look at this from a really simple formula, right? And again, that's a little bit of an allergic word for us artists, but think about it this way, right? If we're at our party, if we're at our artistic party or our normal party, and I say, like, hey, you like this type of work, I bet you would like this artist, right? They are this type of artist, they do this type of art, and then that's really all you need. It's like, I'm an artist who does this type of art, and this is what I do. And I think as soon as you kind of understand that, like, that's probably what you're after, it becomes a lot easier to understand the value of the clarity and the value of thinking about particularly where you sit in terms of genre or cross genre, or how easy it is for people to sort of understand what you do, and how the clarity of the signal that you put out online is going to help people to do that. And this is often a matter of just not doing stuff, right? This is often where the win happens, is like, do less, find the clarity, find the things that are very integral to that message. So A good example would be like, if you were to sort of look at me, it's like Tim is, and again, I'm just sort of brainstorming here, but like Tim is a comic book artist, maybe, who draws a lot of sort of fantasy art, science fiction art, and they also teach people to do the same thing on YouTube, right? Like that's like an easy way, I guess, to describe maybe my art. And again, that's probably what you would sort of get. I guess the thing is, like, if I think about the things that I've discussed in previous episodes, about the things that I think would really be better to focus on when it comes to my signal, which is more about of like narrative, story, fantastical worlds, adventure, sort of journey style stuff. Like, how could I make it really clear in the work that I'm putting out so that when someone did describe me, some of that might get in, and that would help someone to categorize me. Now, again, it seems like, that's a bit, we often want to be amorphous and above categorization, but I think categorization is so critical when it comes to really kind of understanding who different artists are and being able to kind of understand and get your head around what they're doing and what their goals are and where this kind of like fits. And I think this is where, like, you probably can have your cat, right? You can have your hobby, and that can really help people understand who you are. And that's where it could be like, Tim, again, for me, like probably like teaching and doing educational stuff on YouTube is that thing. Like, that's my hobby. I know most people don't know much more about me than that, right? And that probably is my hobby. But, for a lot of people, it would be like, hey, this is Joe, or this is Susie, she's a, sort of illustrator, and she creates sort of dark fantasy work. And, you need to check out her Instagram profile because she also has a great collection of skulls, right? And this is really kind of helps to sort of describe people, right? And it's fun. I'll give you a great example. Someone who came to teach at the concept design workshop quite a few times is the extremely talented Brian Wynier. If you don't know Brian is a creature designer. And, I can easily describe Brian and say, Brian is one of the nicest guys you've ever met. But he just creates, and he doesn't look like a crazy creature designer. He just looks like a super nice, sort of straight-laced guy. But he does these kind of awful, crazy creature designs for sort of horror films. And he literally has a great collection of skulls, and he sometimes posts those on the internet. Now, that's a really fun story to tell someone. That's a fun way for me to sort of know that artist and to be able to share that artist with someone. And I think, again, Brian is someone who I think has like a great career, great presence online. And, I think it's those little things. Again, it is the hobby that really helps to kind of clarify it and make it something interesting to tell. Now, again, we're not all going to have that. We're not all going to have a great hobby. It doesn't matter. But I think ultimately that's just the best way I can sort of explain often what we're trying to do here is like, can you create a caricature of yourself that is easily understood, easily shareable, and is fun for people to share, that is going to make people want to share your work and say, hey, check this out. You like this, you're probably going to like this guy. He does this thing, and he does this type of art. And by the way, also this thing. That's it. What you can see there is like any confusion there, like too many hobbies, any sort of weirdness is going to cause trouble. And that's why with everything, with branding, marketing, all this stuff, clarity, focus is so important. So that's like, I guess, and a good, the last sort of, I guess, example there that I'll kind of leave you with is how, and a lot of this does have to, and I'll link this to this concept of positioning. Now, positioning is, it's a book that is written about a lot of high level sort of marketing concepts and talking about how you kind of need to enter the conversation that's kind of already happening within the sort of buyer's mind, right? That is the concept of positioning, that really people are going to sort of view you a particular way within their mind in relationship to other people, to other properties, to other options, to other artists, to other things. And a lot of your job when you're branding and marketing yourself is to make sure that you position yourself clearly so that people kind of understand what you do and where you sort of sit in the marketplace. Now, Again, it's kind of talking about sort of like huge brands and big sort of marketing concepts, but it's a really important concept, and I've sort of really taken that to heart, and a lot of the sort of teaching in that book. And the way I kind of seen it manifest in my sort of career is, and I've sort of shared this story a couple of times, is that, when I was a comic book artist who was Australian working in the French comic book industry, you can see that like maybe there's the beginning of a story there, right? If you're sort of French and you're buying comics, like the fact that this is Tim Mcburnie and he's Australian and he's working in this kind of style and he's working in that industry, like that's might be good, right? Because I might bring something interesting to that industry. The problem was I probably wasn't really bringing a lot. I was really, and this is where positioning and marketing and presence is so amorphous, is, I was kind of looking at all my favorite French comics, and a lot of those are just really generic, right? So the ideas and the things that I would see that would be fairly sort of mainstream in French comic book culture, to me were really new because I didn't see them in the Western English speaking market. So to me, when I'm drawing those things, I'm like, oh, this is really unique. And a lot of people I'd be speaking to online who were speaking English on English speaking forums would be like, oh, that's so cool. I kind of haven't seen that. As soon as you put that work in the French market, it's far less unique and it's far harder for me to position that work. And not just that, but as we sort of discussed and I have sort of touched on, I kind of was flip-flopping around with the style quite a bit, and sort of not really figuring out like how to kind of have a consistent signal there, and to build and make people understand like who I was. And so it was just really kind of hard. Again, I would say like, I feel like I had great success. Everyone would sort of look at that and be like, oh, that's kind of good. But it felt quite difficult to kind of really get what I wanted to do accepted. And there was a lot of sort of pushback with sort of publishing contracts. I know that's the case for everyone, but if I compare that to the way that I think people would perceive me when I worked in concept art, this is where people would sort of see someone they're working in concept art, but they are a comic book artist. They speak English, but they work in the French comic book style because that's kind of what it was. And I also had the ability to draw scenes because I'd spent a lot of time in comics. Like I could draw and design things. I had a concept artist skill set, but a French comic book style kind of. But again, I spoke English. So you can see that from a positioning standpoint, like that is a much easier story to tell. It's more interesting. And that was a little bit more like, again, a snowball rolling downhill in terms of, how easy it was for me to get traction, for people to kind of understand who I was. And I found that like, in that instance, most of the time when people came to me, they kind of did sort of want what I had to give. And the style that I had, the feelings that I had, the signal that I had became more and more valuable over time. And the more I kind of realized that and understand what people wanted, the easier a lot of those things were. So again, that's just a good example of how when we're putting our work out there, it's a matter of being consistent and really thinking about like how unique is that character? How interesting is that character? How easy is it for people to share that story? Remember that story? I know it's a long way to go, but I think that's like a really simple, easy way to look at what our goal might be. Are you as an artist easily recognizable? Is it easy for people to share your story with other people? Is that story interesting in some way? Or is your art really kind of strong and clear in terms of what it is? Another thing to consider is that often people do have really high concept ideas with their art, where like if you just explain, hey, this is a person who works in this style, but they do this thing. And that'll be such a high concept little combo that you kind of A, want to tell people about it, and B, people will just kind of want to go look because they're like, I want to know what that looks like. So again, we're all coming at this from different perspectives. We all have different hobbies, different abilities to put ourselves out there. Some people have no interest in ever sharing your face. Like everyone's different. But ultimately, it all comes down to creating a persona that is very clear and easy to describe and easy for people to understand. Now, that is also maybe a little bit easy to say, right? It's easy to say, hey, just do this thing. I guess the challenge is that this takes time. This is not something where you can obviously make some little change and you're going to see a massive result. And it's also not something that's linear. This is a process, it's a feeling out process. Hopefully, if we understand where we want to go to be sort of recognizable in some way, shape, or form, and that that's a good goal to head towards, then even if we meander a bit and it takes us a while to dial all those things in, really figure out what our signal is, how to amplify it, figure out whether people are listening to that. And then again, the last thing here is to understand that, again, the presence is really a matter of sitting there and continually putting out work and doing things, creating, which is what we're here to do, making art, and just seeing, like, what do people really enjoy about what I have to say? Often we have things that we want to draw, stories we want to tell, things we want to do. And it takes a while to kind of figure out exactly how to make that connect with your audience and build that presence. And sometimes it does require fiddling around, like playing around, changing styles, modifying things. Again, there is an experimentation process to the whole thing where this is not linear, this is not easy. You do have to mess around, you do have to play around. But if we view this as a goal, then I think it hopefully clarifies a lot of this stuff. This is not something where you just sort of set it and forget it, right? Like, I guess that's the bottom line. But what we can think about is like maybe refining again, less like, okay, if we think about this is what people see. People see, hopefully, ideally, a really clear, iconic, symbolic caricature of yourself as an artist that you have hopefully had some hand in making. Because I really think, again, a lot of us want to not choose ourselves as artists. We want to get picked by someone else. We want to get validated by the market, validated by someone hiring us, validated by people, just magically kind of seeing what we're doing. And it can maybe feel crass to say, well, I'm actually going to try and engineer some of that. But I think that's often where you're going to probably have the most success. And I think a lot of people kind of end up here or, often just consciously do this anyway. So again, let me know in the comments down below. Send me an email, tim@thedrawingcodex.com. If you, have some extra sort of thoughts on that, I'd be keen to, know how that comes across, right? Because it could be very mercenary in the way it kind of sounds. But I think the best way to understand it is similar to what I said before, is that like ultimately not everyone's going to like what you're doing. But if you can learn to put out a good signal over time, it means that people who are going to connect, even if it's a very small audience, are going to be able to find you and are easily going to be able to share your work with other people that they know would really like your work. And the more niche you are, the more important it is for you to do this, really, to become clear about who you are. Because then, again, those little niche, weird topics, they're like, oh, well, here's an artist you'd like, and they're really not like anyone else. Again, that's a great story to tell, right? Again, if it's clear, if you have a good presence, people are going to want to share your work. But I think the fundamental challenge here that we have to understand is that you're kind of looking for not just that external representation of you, not just the thing that people are going to be able to talk about or describe you as at a party, but what do you actually need to do to make that happen? Like, what is the formula that you use to keep you on that track, to keep you on the path? This is one of the things I'm sort of working with at the moment, is really thinking about like, okay, like what are the things of the infinite things that I could do, of the infinite things that I could draw, of the infinite things that I could sketch, of the infinite ways I could use my social media profiles and the various sort of things that I'm doing, the work that I'm doing, like what should I do? Like what are the things that are ultimately going to make me the most happy? And what I find is like, it is non-obvious. It is easy to wake up in the morning and be like, what should I draw? And then to draw something that, maybe I'm thinking I'm going to draw it because it's easy, or I saw someone else's art the other day and I wanted to kind of do something similar, or I want to change. And it's so easy. I find this often. It's like, even though I talk about this a lot, it's easy for me to then just start imagining something that I'm going to do. And then that kind of just doesn't fit really who I am as an artist. When I put it out into the world, people are like, what are you doing here? You're just kind of messing around. And I'm like, well, yeah, I don't know. Like, it's easy to fall off the path here. So it's good to think about, like, what are those formulas? I shared this in the previous episode talking about volume, but like, what are some clear ways that you could set yourself some guide rails? And what I said there was that often, one of the things that I'm often drawn to do, and that seems really good, is to draw like superheroes and sort of fan art and like action poses and these kind of like hyperdynamic things. And these were things that I thought that I should do to succeed in the world, to become a comic book artist. And I kind of decided, you know what, like none of those are really what I'm about. But still, it's easy to kind of get sucked up and be like, maybe I should do some fan art because that'll get some likes, or, you're just going to have these random ideas. I think if I kind of, again, just build that little formula for myself, and this is what I would suggest you try, is like, think about like, what are the things that you kind of know maybe are like little shiny objects for you, where you keep sort of going after it. You keep kind of trying to be like, oh, maybe I'll learn to do this, do that. But like, ultimately, this is really just not going to serve you. Let's kind of write those down, make this part of a little plan. And just every time you sort of bump into that, just remind yourself like, right, this is not my path, like this is not what I'm going to do. I think often that clarity can have a huge impact on just creating that consistent presence, and making sure that you find out and discover ways to create the art that you want that kind of does fit that kind of overall brand that you're trying to create. And also, figure out not just the things you're going to stay away from, but what are the things that really should be part of every sort of image that you're creating, the things that are your greatest hits. This is something that is so hard to do. It's hard for musicians to do as well. And this is part of the reason why I use the musical metaphor here, is that often musicians fall foul of this. They create some really sort of great songs early on, and then they're kind of stuck playing those greatest hits at, when they're 60 or 70 years old. And they often hate it because they're interested in their new music. But it's just important to understand the thing that supports your artistic endeavor is often those greatest hits, and figuring out how to play them, how to be enthusiastic about that, how to embrace that process. And also understand, and this is the last thing that I'll leave you here with in terms of like some strategies you could maybe use, is just understand in general, like it takes a long time for this to really work. And it's really hard, as I said, to see some massive impact of you saying, okay, I'm going to commit to a particular path. Like it's going to take, if you're, I'll use a couple of examples, but it can easily take like 3 to 7 years for this to really make some massive difference in your career, or the amount of sort of followers or likes you get. It really often takes time to commit to a concept like this, to keep creating work that feels similar, to really, again, find that connection, to build the craft, to build the volume, to figure out how to actually get people to pay attention to it, what works, what doesn't. Because you can easily get sidetracked and be like, well, I'm doing this thing that everyone seems to like, but again, it's not really what I'm about. And that can burn a couple of years. It takes time to do this. So I'll give you a couple examples, right? But even if you look at sort of me, right? If you think about the time it will take for like an artist, or me sort of early on in my career, if I kind of become known for creating a particular type of art, I may know people who are in my circle who are looking at what I'm doing, and they'll say, hey, this is Tim, this is the type of work he does. But they're not in a position to hire me. But maybe say 3 years later, that person does become an art director. Now they could hire me. Now, the small percentage of people who could hire me, a couple of people will maybe say, I am actually going to hire Tim. But they probably aren't on a project where they can, because maybe there's other artists are hired, or it's a different style, or they're like, I really want to work with that person because I like what they're doing. I understand clearly who they are. I think we would like working with each other. I'm sure I'm going to, I vibe the same. So, I'm sure I'll be working on projects that are similar to that. But it's going to take them a long time to get to a point where like they have the power to hire you, to commission you, like whatever, to buy the thing you want. And they're in a position to do it, and the right project comes up, and then also that you're free. So these things can often take like a decade for someone to like first kind of see and get that glimmer and understanding of like, oh, that's who that is. That's what they're about. And then they kind of see you keep doing that for a few years, and they're like, oh, I kind of get it. I like it. And then to get to a point where like they could hire, like the number of people who can do that is very small. And then to actually find the right project, the right fit, the right time. So it often takes like this huge amount of time for you doing these things to make any difference, to really move the needle in any seeming way. So this is a long game, and this is one of these things where it's very hard to sort of commit to this because it often just takes a long time. But as a couple of examples, again, if you had a beginner, right, and you're kind of starting to do this and you're thinking about like, what's the value of this? A lot of it is just that it's going to save you a bit of time. It's going to make things a little bit easier to think in these terms, I think anyway. But it's still going to take years to build the craft. You're going to have to really figure out what type of art you want to make, how to give it the right sort of volume, And then even once you kind of figure it out and you're like, oh, this kind of clicks, it's going to take a while to like keep putting that out, refining it. Often it seems like you've kind of figured it out, but then you haven't, right? You need to try different subject matter, different sort of things, and sort of really figure out what is core about who you are. And then it's probably going to take another few years for you to build that audience and get more people to know about it. And then, as I said, even once that's when most people are going to be like, oh, that person exists and that's who they are. And I like that. And then it's probably going to take, another bunch of years before you're going to see people who are like, I saw it. I thought I might want to hire that person, and now I actually have the right project, right? It's such a long process. Even if and a lot of people often levy these kind of criticisms, because I have X number of subscribers on different platforms or whatever, although I don't think it's astronomical by any means. But, if I changed my style, if I said okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to lean hard into children's book illustration, something I've considered doing quite a number of times. How long would it take for people to be like, wait, what's Tim Mcburnie doing now? What's going on? It would take a couple of years for people to really, for the market to really understand, what's he doing? It would take me a long time to create a body of work that I could actually replace all of my current folio with. And then even if I did that, how many bits of images and interviews that I've got all over the internet and different things that I've done that are showing my kind of, often stuff that's not really suitable for children, really. How long would it take for that to go in? And maybe even I would need to make a completely new alias or a pen name. But even then, that's going to take so long to kind of really build and make people understand what I'm doing. I mean, if I did that, if I did a hard right, if I just turned really suddenly and said, I'm going to change everything about my style, it would take, I think it would be 3 to 5 years until I really felt that career would sort of pick up. Maybe you get lucky, but it really doesn't matter what experience you have. It takes a long time to build these things. So that's just important to understand when we're getting at this. This is not a quick fix. This is a philosophy. Again, it's a framework. It's something that you build over time. And I think will have a lot of value over time. Think of it, again, like a snowball, right? It starts out small, but the whole point is that as it goes, it gets bigger and bigger and it starts to take on a life of its own. And ultimately, again, there's not much you can do to control it. It's just getting bigger and better every day. All right, let's do some quick takeaways before we bounce out of here. Firstly, if we look at this from an analytical point of view, I think all I'd say is this is really simple, is that when I kind of describe these things seem very logical to me. I think that there's a lot of sense here. I think that when you understand the value of this, it's really clear. But also understand that the problems that often stop us and the reason why not everyone's doing this are also very natural. They're very integral to what it is to be an artist. And I think as long as you kind of understand that tension, that should give you a lot of confidence that a lot of the reasons why you may be resisting doing this or maybe why you haven't done this, are very sensible. And it's also a long game. So this is just one of these tricky things to truly apply, but the logic to me is really, really clear here. And I've seen this happen with a lot of my career. So that is really all we need to analyze here, is that this is a long game. It's one of these things where you're not going to see that instant gratification. So a lot of people aren't going to lean into it. I think we're naturally predisposed to not do this as artists. So again, I think as long as you understand that, hopefully that will give you some ideas for, what you can do to actually get this happening and how you can sort of counteract those natural tendencies. If you want a really simple, easy takeaway here, it's that repetition gets you noticed. This is something that people recognize. They recognize the repetition. It's a simple pattern and it helps people to understand what's going on. We're just drawn to patterns. We want to understand who someone really is. And the more you can show people a consistent body of work, the easier that is for them to do. If you want a really simple, practical takeaway, besides some of the advice I've given in terms of just pick some things that obviously just aren't really what you're into and just, if those are shiny objects for you, just kind of swear off them, right? Just be like, look, I just need to stop trying to do that. It's not me. And figure out what is you and do that, right? Apart from those sort of things, I'd say just go out into the world and see where you see this happening. See where you can look at people who you would really admire, or people who have a good, admirable level of career success or exposure online, like whatever you want to call it, like whatever is important to you, I guess, and just look at like what they're doing. Look at how consistent they are with the work that they're posting. Look at like, could you describe them? Again, not everyone's doing a great job of this. Like I think we could all probably do a better job of this. But just look at how it's happening in the world. Look at the consistency that people are often presenting on their social media profiles, in their portfolios, in art books. Often if people have this art book, they're one of those artists who is in the books. It's often because they're easily recognizable. So just look at when this is happening. And I think the more you notice it happening, the easier it will be for you to kind of understand like, oh, okay, this is just something that we can do as well. If you want to look at this from a philosophical or a spiritual point of view, I think fundamentally here, this is where the power of clarity and saying no is really, really important. Often in the beginning, we are essentially saying yes to every learning, every experimentation, every new thing. If you're doing your job right as an artist, you are really trying to learn and get better and improve. But there is a point at which like you've kind of learned some craft, you kind of figured out some of this stuff. What do you do with it then? And I think really this is often the step that is missing in most stuff when it comes to art education. Most people talking about like, how do you render better? How do you do better this? What's the point? Like, when do we actually get to make art? This should be the major thing that we're doing as far as I'm concerned, is making stuff, making art, putting it out into the world, seeing what people think, enjoying that process, right? Like building a body of work. And a lot of the real challenge is that at some point you kind of have to say no to new things and new learning, even though, again, it's challenging because a lot of people will say, and I agree, that we need to be learning our entire life, right? We always need to be improving, but you can't learn forever. At some point, you need to make art. You need to do things. You need to figure out how to put all those skills into practice, to actually do it, to apply your knowledge. And I think that understanding that often what people are wanting out of art, out of you, is to understand who you are, what you have to say, and that creating this consistency with your work makes it really easy for people to understand. I think it allows people to understand in a much deeper way what you're about. Because when you sort of create a huge body of work that has a similar style or a similar feeling, people get to immerse themselves in it. And I think that provides a massive amount of value. People really get to kind of feel what you're about, like what your vibe is. And this is a way where we can connect with people on a really sort of subverbal, powerful level. And the consistency helps with this. Seeing what is a pattern and what is not is just something I think that's endlessly fascinating. And seeing people take on slightly different things with a very sort of consistent signal is kind of endlessly fascinating. Seeing the different ways that people express themselves, even though it's kind of very similar. It often seems like, I think, to us that, maybe this is just repeating ourselves, or like, isn't that going to get boring? But I think to someone who's looking at work, again, we spend all day, we spend our whole life making art. And if you're kind of just doing the same thing, it feels to us like I'm kind of repeating myself. But to someone who's looking at our art and appreciating our art and doing, I guess, what we want out of someone appreciating our art, is they're seeing a very small amount of our art per day. And I think the consistency there, the signal that we have to build, the presence we have to build, is there to appreciate that, again, for most people, we're a very small, very tiny part of their life, if at all. And the more consistent we can be, the more, again, our message is going to get through. And I think this is something that applies to you working as a concept artist, as a cog in a machine, right? The more consistent you can be, the easier it is for people to kind of allow you to actually have some impact on the games you're making, the videos you're making, like whatever it is that you're doing. Again, it's going to be different versus you being an auteur artist. But I think just to understand that this concept of putting out a body of work and being consistent about it. For us, it often seems like we're just repeating ourselves. But for a lot of people, this is the consistency that they need in order to notice us in the first place and to really figure out ultimately what we're about. Anyway, that's what we've got time for on this particular episode of the Visual Scholar podcast. Let me know down below if you're listening on YouTube in a comment, or again, you can often comment on podcast platforms as well, what you thought of this episode and also of the impact framework altogether. This will probably be the last sort of episode that I do talking about this concept for a little while. So again, let me know what you think of this. I am actually thinking of building a larger kind of course around this concept because it's really been helping me. And when I do follow this up, it might be to kind of share some of the sort of experiences I've had when it comes to sort of applying this to a lot of the things that I'm doing, because these are thoughts that I've had that I found have really been helping people sort of work through some of their sort of issues. And these are also ideas that I'm going to apply as much as I can to my own career, to my own work, and to basically everything that I'm doing. So if you have tried some of these out, or this has kind of helped you, I'd be really, really keen to know. Leave me a comment, send me an email, tim@thedrawingcodex.com. Other than that, we'll catch you around on the next one.